everybody, my name is Keely and I am the First Impressions Director here at Grace Empire, and I am honored to welcome you to Grace Empire Online. Here's what you can expect from today. Our services are an hour long, and in the next few minutes, Pastor Charlie will pop on and share with us the message that God has laid on his heart for this evening. We would love to interact with you. Please feel free to comment, question, share any prayer or praise reports in the comments below. At Grace Empire, we believe that giving is an extension of our worship. We give to give, not give to get. At Grace Empire Online, we have two ways we can give. One is via the website, and two is by text. Feel free to follow the instructions on the screen below. Thanks for tuning in. We hope that you feel inspired and challenged by today's message.
Good evening, Internet. My name is Amy Kay, and I'm the small groups pastor at Grace Empire in Wesley Chapel, Florida. And I would love to welcome you to week 33 of Grace Empire Online. 33, that's crazy, right? Our vision here at Grace Empire is to restore, revitalize, and refresh the community of Tampa Bay through an intimate relationship with Jesus. So if you feel like your life has been battered, bruised, beat up, broken, or bedraggled in any way, Grace Empire was created for you to call home. We know that life is hard, and we want to make sure that you are not doing life alone. And we love interaction around here. So feel free, please, make comments, ask questions, ask for prayer while you're watching, and the admins will address it. They love when you make comments. Usually I'm an admin, and I love when people comment. I love reading all the comments. So make comments, right? All right, but before we get to the sermon, our online disclaimer, right? Here at Grace Empire, we are focused on giving you sermons. Grace Empire Online is focused on giving you sermons. So without a doubt, this is an incomplete version of church. As we move forward in this online church thing, I want to urge you and remind you that online church should never replace the community you get from your local church. We love you, and we're so honored that you tuned in with us today. And by no means am I saying this to guilt trip you, hurt you, or make you feel inadequate in any way. Everyone is on a different journey with God, and the fact that some of you are watching is a huge step, and I applaud you for that. At Grace Empire, our goal is to keep Jesus at the center of everything we do. And a big part of that is understanding your place within the church. It's not just that you need people, which you do, but it's that people need you. But as I said, online church is an incomplete version of what God has intended church to be. The local church also gives you a place to worship, to praise and sing, to meet with other believers in fellowship and discipleship, to serve the community through social action, which is what we're going to be talking about today, and to fulfill the sacraments of the church. For us, there's two sacraments, baptism and communion. And we do communion at the beginning of every week, beginning of every month, which was last week. So, and the last purpose of the local church is a place to give your tithes and offerings. At GXC, we teach that we give to give. We don't give to get. We give our tithes and offerings because we are thankful that God has provided for our needs. It is also to acknowledge that we live, we work, and we are sustained because He allows us to be. And because of the advancements in technology, giving is easy. You can give online through our website, www.graceempire.com, or via text by texting the words Grace Empire to the number 77977, and then follow the link texted to you. You can either do that now, or you could do that at the end of the message. All right, we got the disclaimer out of the way. Let's get to Jesus. First thing we're going to do is pray. Jesus, I'm so excited to preach. I'm probably talking a million miles an hour, but I pray that you would help your words to be, help me to speak your words, help me to convey your heart, and help us to learn today what you have to teach us from your word. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. So one of the cool things about online church is that people get to watch from all over, right? I have my mom listens sometimes from Tennessee. Sometimes my dad tunes in from New York. And for a while there, we've had a lot of new people watching from the Tampa Bay area, from New Tampa, from Wesley Chapel. Even for a little bit, we had people coming to our Zooms from Costa Rica. And I thought that was pretty cool. But it doesn't matter where you're listening from. It's likely that you have been hearing a lot about the problems in the world. I generally enjoy listening to the news. I'm kind of boring person like that. And I like feeling informed about the world I live in. But it's been hard lately. And by lately, I mean more than just last week, which was especially not fun, right? I actually took a break from certain social medias and I have severely limited my exposure to the news. I don't know if I could overstate the number of problems in the world right now. And it can be really discouraging to hear it on the news, at your workplace, on your social media, in conversation with friends or family. And that's why I'm really glad you're here today, because we're going to talk about being part of the solution. Maybe we can't solve every problem, but we are going to do what we can with what we have right where we are. And at the end of the sermon today, we're going to talk more about how Grace Empire plans to be part of the solution here in Tampa. You will have the chance to be part of the solution, to bring some tangible good to our local community. But before we get to the solution, we have to talk about the problem. And maybe you have experienced this problem. So I have this is a throwback right here. Check it out. You see that? Maybe I should turn it this way. This is my old MacBook, right? I have this craft bin and I was looking for something in it the other day. And at the bottom, I found my old MacBook. And instead of giving it away or selling it, I held on to it. And now it's utterly worthless. It's of no value at all, which is the problem one of the early church leaders, James, is telling us about in James chapter 5. He's not really talking about MacBooks specifically, but James is talking about all the stuff we accumulate and hold on to, the way we hoard our money, and sometimes in the form of hoarding stuff, right? And how in the end, it all loses value and it's eventually worthless. And by hoarding our wealth to ourselves, we've lost the chance of being helpful to others in this world. James really takes us to task with his words. He has some harsh words for his audience, first century Jewish Christians, and for us. So I think it might help to learn a little bit about James before we dive into it. James is kind of a unique leader in the early church because when Jesus was going around and healing and teaching, James did not believe he was the Messiah. See, James was the brother, half-brother really, of Jesus. And if your brother claimed to be the Messiah, you may have had a similar reaction, right? Try to keep him quiet. And when that doesn't work, just keep your distance. But when you see your brother die and you know where he was buried, and then you have a conversation with him after he comes back to life, which he had predicted would happen, it changes your perspective. So James became one of the early leaders in the church in Jerusalem. He wrote one letter in the New Testament. We call that book James. And it's a really practical, no-nonsense book about what faith should look like in your day-to-day life. So we're going to read James chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. But I'm going to give you the point up front so that if you have to leave early or you fall asleep or you lose internet connection, you will know where we are headed, right? So this is the point, right? Start giving while you're living, because what you're holding is molding. And I have to give 100% credit to Andy Stanley because he came up with that little rhymey thing, but it perfectly conveys what James is teaching here, right? And I think it's a great way to remember it. So we're going to say it together. Ready? Say it with me. Start giving while you're living, because what you're holding is molding. I found some moldy cheese in the fridge yesterday. I thought about bringing it and showing it, but I thought it was kind of gross. So I spared you guys that. So you're welcome. But anyways, that's the fun way of remembering it. But James' way of saying it is a bit more on the nose. And I want you to know that these are his words, not my words. And that way we can still be friends when all this is over. So let's get started with James chapter 5, verse 1. Now listen, you rich people. And even though we're only 5 words in, we need to stop and discuss this, because my knee-jerk reaction is that does not apply to me because I am not rich, right? Maybe you feel similar to me, right? When you get the verse, when you read those verses in the Bible that talk about rich people, you kind of look around like, who are the rich people they're talking about? Because it's not me, right? A lot of times we think that we are not rich because we don't feel rich. But here's a crazy fact. A $40,000 income in the United States has enough buying power to put you in the 98th percentile globally for per person income. Now, I'm not an economist and I'm not even that good at math. And I had to call my brother and kind of ask him like, hey, could you explain this thing to me, right? But I can understand that this statement means that most of the world looks at us and thinks that we are filthy rich, right? And the whole world could look at me, or the whole world could look at you and call us rich, and we would be unconvinced because we're unconvinced about our riches because we don't feel rich. Even if you don't make $40,000 a year, you probably make more than millions of people around the world. And over time, you may make more now than you used to, and you still don't feel rich. But it doesn't matter what we feel, because this is a fact. By international standards, we are rich. We have been given much. When I read this fact, I didn't feel any richer. Yet I am near the top 2% of wage earners in the world. And actually, the people James was writing to, they had some feelings about rich people too. Their feelings, their assumptions were that rich people were more loved by God. Poor people, they're not loved by God so much, right? And this wasn't just a view of Christians or a view of Jews at the time. Actually, most people in the first century saw wealth as approval from God or the gods, and poverty or sickness as a sign of disapproval or sin, right? You can actually see this in some of the Gospels. There's a story in John chapter 9. There's a blind man. He's unable to work. And they come to Jesus and they say, who sinned, this man or his parents? And Jesus said, that's not it at all. Wealth or lack of wealth does not indicate God's feelings towards us. As we will see in a second, rich people are not more loved. Rich people are more responsible to God for what they do with their wealth. So rich people are not more loved by God. They're just held more responsible for what they do with their wealth. Just because we don't feel rich doesn't mean that God isn't talking to us. So let's read what James is saying. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Ouch. Right? When I first read this, I was like, that sounds judgy. And it still feels a little bit like it doesn't really apply to me. And you're probably sitting on your rebuttal to me that $40,000 would go a long way if I was living in Thailand, but I live in Tampa, so not rich. But look at how James defines wealth. Wealth is excess, not access. You're not wealthy because you have access to all the luxuries in this world. You are considered wealthy because you have more food than you need and more clothes than you can wear. Wealth is excess, not access. Go look at your garage. Like, the garage, right? Don't look at my garage, right? If your garage looks like a storage facility for things you're not using, you may have some excess. And James defines wealth as excess, not access. Wealth in the time of this letter, when James is writing, was food and crops and having more than one item of clothing. When James says your wealth has rotted, he's saying that you have so much food that it went bad before you could even eat it. And you kept all your food to yourself and let it rot instead of feeding those in need. I'm not proud of this, but my fridge, yikes, okay? So I don't even want to know what James would say to me. I would certainly be considered extravagantly rich. And James continues, moths have eaten your clothes. Moths don't eat the clothes on your body, right? So he's implying that the rich kept clothing for themselves when other people could have used them. The clothes were put to no good use. Essentially, he's saying you have so many clothes in your closet that the moths are just using them for food. And at the same time, people could have used them. So, sounds like my closet. Your gold and silver are corroded. Silver and gold don't actually corrode, but they tarnish, which indicates how long they were untouched and hoarded away, no benefit for anybody. Listen, reading this was really hard for me. It evoked some real self-evaluation. It sounds like James has wandered around my house, seen the vegetables that went bad in my fridge and all the clothes that don't even fit me in my closet. And I'll just, cross my fingers and hope that James does not look at my garage. Anybody else there with me, right? Before taking time to study this, I would have just read over these words and had the feeling that they don't apply to me because I don't classify myself as rich. But God has given me much. God has given us much, and we are accountable to that. This realization that I am wealthy, even if I don't feel like it, brings difficulty to the next part, right? It says, their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. These things that I hoard are a sign of my selfishness and greed. The accumulation of things with disregard for the needs of others is irrefutable evidence of selfishness. My desire to keep given to myself and to hoard and collect and find security in my things instead of God says something about me, and it's not complimentary, right? We have a tendency as people to collect and hoard and place our trust in stuff instead of placing trust in the Creator who has given us life and strength to work. And the problem with placing our trust in our stuff is that it will rot and one day be worthless, right? And it will never feel like enough. When you put your security in stuff, you will always need more, need to acquire more safety, more security. The whole time our attention is on ourselves and our perceived needs. And we don't see how we're secure in God, who provides all these things for us and more so that we can share. He has blessed us richly so that we can bless others. It's like this. Pre-COVID, we used to have these donut days at the school. Some fundraising group or another would bring Krispy Kreme donuts to the school and sell them for $1 each on Friday. So on my best put together days, I would remember to bring cash, and I would hand $5 to Kal-El and tell him, go get some donuts, right? What is my expectation? My expectation, and Cal knows this, is that he is going to take the $5 given to him and take care of his sisters as well as himself, right? I don't even have to tell him, right? Because he knows my heart. How would I feel later if I heard that Cal ate 5 donuts and didn't give any donuts to his sister? But Cal didn't do that. Cal wouldn't do that. And he never did that, right? Because Cal knows that my heart is for all my children. Even though I didn't give the money to Vesper and I didn't give the money to Valentine, my heart is that my son would care for my other children because I gave him the money. And I know that he would, right? God's heart is like a good parent. He expects those who have will care for those who do not have. And we fall into this consumption assumption. The consumption assumption is that everything I have is for my consumption. Everything that comes to me is mine to keep. Which brings me back to James and his assertion that the accumulation of things with disregard for the needs of others is irrefutable evidence of selfishness that will testify against us. Right? Back to verse 3. He says, you have hoarded wealth in the last days. We need to find the perspective that says these are the last days, because it doesn't feel like the last days to me, right? Maybe if I was older or I don't know, something was different, but it doesn't I don't really feel like I'm in the last days, right? But it's true. We don't have forever to help people. And it brings up this iconic movie scene from Schindler's List. And Charlie told me that movie's too old and probably most of the people under 25 have never seen it. So I don't know. Put it in the comments. Is this movie too old or do you know what I'm talking about, right? But there's this iconic scene in Schindler's List that's burned into my memory. And the guy is standing there and he's looking at his things I could have sold this pin and helped another person or gotten rid of my briefcase or my jacket or, he's looking at his little possessions saying I could have done more, right? I could have helped more. I could have saved more because he's realizing he was in the last days. And what he has learned in that situation is that you need to start giving while you're living because what you're holding is molding. Have you ever had the responsibility of working through an estate of a family member who has died? You look around and there's so much stuff. All these things that were hoarded away. kept for nothing, right? And believe it or not, on this point, I think Denzel Washington says it best. So we're going to watch that clip of Denzel now.
You know, you'll never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. Whatever you have in life, you can't take it with you. The Egyptians tried it. All they got was robbed. So it doesn't matter what you have. What matters is what you do with what you have. Not how much you have, but what do you do with what you have and what God has given you. I don't have what you have. You don't have what I have. We all have unique abilities, unique talents. Who have you lifted up? Who have you made better today?
All right, he says it best, right? You don't see a U-Haul following a hearse. We can't take it with us. And while this message feels harsh, please take it as a message of love. As I read and studied and read and reread, I felt like God was pushing me more in my giving. You know, like we've always tithed and we give to all the projects the church has done, you know, and I believe what we say, right? My giving is an extension of my worship. That's not just something, you know, we say to you guys. It's something that we have found true in our lives, right? And, you know, it's this small prayer I pray as I transfer the money out of my account, you know, like, God, thank you for what you've given to us. Thank you for my help and my ability to work. And I feel like I've been given for as many years as I've been working. But when I read this, it really like opened my eyes to my own selfishness. I could feel like the Bible working as a mirror to my heart and giving me a moment to self-examine and evaluate myself, right? All right, so let's move on to the next part, which James, again, it feels like it's not written for us. So we're looking at verse 4 and 5, chapter 5, verse 4 and 5, right? Look, the wages you have failed to pay the workers who mow your field are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. Now, this one is super easy to point your finger and say, yes, employers need to pay an honest wage and rich people shouldn't look for loopholes. And yes, employers are held accountable to God, but look at what James is saying, right? If you get to the core of it, he's saying that we are responsible before God for what we do with our wealth. Resourced people shouldn't look for opportunities to do less. Resourced people should look for opportunities to do more. We shouldn't look for opportunities to do less. We should look for opportunities to do more. You know, what would luxury have been back in this first century context, right? It would look like storing up extra wine and grain because those are the things that could keep, right? Filling your house with nice furniture, having extra clothes. Kind of sounds like my house, right? Who has lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence? We have. We who have been given much should not be looking for loopholes to keep and hoard our wealth. If wealth is excess and not access, then people with excess are not more loved, but held more responsible. James says, you have fattened yourselves for the day of slaughter. And this is alluding to the practice of having a fattened calf, like maybe you've heard it in a story or some of the parables, right? Fattened calf for a celebration. And so, you know, nowadays when Thanksgiving or a celebration comes along, we don't really have to think ahead. You just stop by the market and buy turkey. And, you know, if you find out you're going to have extra guests, you could order some more food and even have it delivered to your house. That you don't have to try to shop at Publix with the rest of New Tampa. But in the first century and even before, there wasn't a way to get food for a celebration that was last minute. It required some thinking ahead, right? So for a rich family or for people of means, they would set aside a calf and they would feed it extra and protect it, and it would be available should a cause for celebration arise. There is a security in having food set aside and waiting for you. No different than today. The audience was finding security in wealth and provisions that they had stored up for themselves. They, like us, have come to count on their money to be a safety net, their investments to give them security, their job to assure their well-being, and their stuff to give them stability. They set aside this fattened calf thinking someday they would celebrate their wealth and good fortune. And James turns it and says, you are planning for your own embarrassment. James says, you have fattened yourselves for the day of slaughter. Instead of celebrating your wealth, it will become the evidence of your selfish use of the resources God has given to you. Historians say that James wrote this book around 47 to 49 AD or CE, or however you want to tell time. And James was a leader in the Christian church in Jerusalem, and he wrote it to Jewish Christians in Jerusalem and scattered throughout the ancient Roman world. He was, James was always talking about Jesus, right? After Jesus resurrected, it changed James. He wouldn't shut up about Jesus, right? And apparently when James spoke about his brother Jesus, it often convinced Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. And this was a problem for the Jewish leadership, the high priest in particular, right? He wanted to get rid of James. Like, this guy's a pain in my neck, right? So around 62 CE, they saw their opportunity and they had James murdered. I won't get into the gruesome details, right? But the high priest took advantage of a gap in Roman leadership at the time to have him illegally stoned. Well, fast forward, about 8 years after his death, these words in his letter took on a different feeling when there was a siege on Jerusalem. Titus, who eventually became the Roman Empire, was sent in by Vespasian, I'm going to get it right, Vespasian, to put an end to the Jewish revolts, right? They're tired of the Jews revolting, so they come in and they siege the city, and people were trapped in Jerusalem with all their stuff. And as the siege continued, they began to die of starvation, disease, and mob violence. And eventually, their defenses crumbled completely, and tens of thousands of them were enslaved, and all their wealth was carted off. All their stuff became the property of Rome. Did James know that their wealth would be taken by Rome? Was this some kind of prediction? Right? Well, yes and no. I don't think he knew that Jerusalem would be laid bare by a siege and that everyone would lose their possessions to Rome. I just think he knew the same thing, that would happen to them, would happen to us. The same thing that will happen to all of us is that we can't keep the wealth we have stored up here on earth. When we die, none of it will go with us. We will leave it all behind. And it will say something about us. What we do with our wealth, with our excess, says something about us. So the problem, all the wealth we have stored up is already losing value, and our excess is not a sign of God's extra love for us. We are accountable to Him for what we do with it and how we help His other children with it. And I want you to hear me on this. I'm not advocating for some kind of ascetic lifestyle, right? Where, I'm not saying you should be John the Baptist and go live in the wilderness and eat bugs and honey and scavenge. That's not what I'm saying, right? And you should have a savings account, right? You can have some of these things in life. But if we return to the problem, right? Start giving while you're living, because what you're holding is molding. I'm advocating for a change in perspective, a shift in understanding that says that what I have been given is mine to steward, right? Peter, another leader in the church in Jerusalem with James, says, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. This mindset is so much more than money, but it includes our money. Just because God gave it to you doesn't mean that He intended for you to spend it all on yourself. So now that we thoroughly understand the problem, we have come to the solution, right? This month as a church, we are doing the Big Give. And this is a special time of giving where we ask you to partner with us, with Grace Empire, to make a real difference in the community. Most months we have a project, and as a church, we've decided to partner with different organizations around the community that are already making a difference. Sometimes we partner with faith-based organizations, sometimes, they're not faith-based, but every time there are organizations that are working to serve the community. So Lexi is our leader of missions and outreach, and she's gonna get on here and tell you a little bit about last month's project and introduce our project for this month.
Hey everyone, my name's Lexi Bontrager and I am the Missions and Outreach Director here at Grace Empire. I wanted to pop on and update you about our October and November outreach. For October, we partnered with Turner Bartels and participated in Socktober. With their contributions and your donations, we were able to give Metropolitan Ministries over 300 pairs of socks. That's awesome. Thank you guys so much for your donations. I know I can always count on you for outreach. For November, we're partnering with Metropolitan Ministries again. Did you know Metropolitan Ministries can make a Thanksgiving meal for $1.90 each? What? That's crazy, but they can. So we are going to be participating in a big give to help them out by giving meals to our community. So what can you do? Well, we're asking you to give. You can log on to graceempire.life and click give, or you can text Grace Empire to 77977. When you get to that screen that looks like tithes and offering, you can click the arrow and scroll down to Big Give. Then give whatever you can. On November 16th, we're going to ground up all those funds and we are going to donate them to Metropolitan Ministries. I can't wait to get on here in December and tell you how far your donations have gone. If you guys ever have questions about missions or outreach, you can always email me at lexi@graceempire.life. I'd love to chat with you.
All right, I'm excited about this project. I'm curious to see how many people we as a church will be able to feed by partnering with Metropolitan Ministries. You know, we don't have a dollar amount goal, but I kind of have a participation goal. I would really love to see 100% participation. For only $1.90, you could feed another person a meal. Maybe you give a little, maybe you give more. Either way, you have our guarantee that whatever you give will 100% go to Metropolitan Ministries. We know the problem, right? We have excess while others are still in need. So today, let's be part of the solution and allow God to talk to you and me about how we give from what He has given us. Let's pray. God, this message was, hard and maybe a little on the nose for the time in the day, that you give it to me. But God, I really do believe these were your words for us as a church. You want us to be generous, to share and care for the people in our community that don't have. And I pray that you would open our eyes to what we have and what we can give. Speak to each of us as we go throughout, our day and our weeks, and as we lead up to this time for our big give. We ask all these things in your name we pray. Amen. All right, so if this service has affected you in some way or you feel closer to God, do us a huge favor and like, share, and subscribe to our channel. It will help us move the message of Jesus to more people in our community. And if you know someone that needs to hear this, please share it, right? You can share it on Facebook, you can share it on YouTube, and you may, without knowing it, end up saving someone else's life. As always, we hope you were blessed. We hope you were inspired, and we hope you leave one step closer to Jesus. Goodbye.